Hello, and welcome everyone to today's book launch and discussion on Living the Corporate Purpose Insights from Companies in Asia, brought to you by World Scientific Publishing. The event will begin shortly. Thank you. Once again, welcome. A few housekeeping rules before we start. Please mute your mic. However, you may wish to leave your camera turned on. Also, this event will be recorded and posted online. Today, we are very fortunate to have the special guest, Professor Arnoud De Meyer, and the authors of Living the Corporate Purpose, Insights from Companies in Asia, Professor Mark Chong and Dr. Flossie Joseph, with us. They will take you through a discussion on how companies in Asia are incorporating purpose in their journey. Professor Arnoud De Meyer served as the fourth president of Singapore Management University. Previously, he was director of Judge Business School at the University of Cambridge and was associated with INSEAD for 23 years, where he held various senior academic and administrative positions, including founding dean of INSEAD's Asia campus in Singapore. And now, let me hand this over to Professor De Meyer to kick things off. Professor De Meyer, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandhya. And I hope you hear me well. Good evening to our colleagues here or listeners here and viewers in Singapore, but I understand there are also people from India, where it is afternoon, from Europe, where it's still lunchtime, or even the United States, where it's actually quite early in the morning and where you probably want to have your breakfast. As Sandhya was saying, I'm currently a university professor at Singapore Management University, but I used to be the president. I'm also the chair of a research institute that is called Stewardship Asia Center, and that is very interested in promoting stewardship, or the combination of good governance with spending a lot of attention on sustainability. And that, of course, is very close to purpose of organizations. And therefore, I was very happy and honored, I have to say, when I was asked to be the moderator for this session here today. Mark and Flossie, the two authors of this book, Mark Chong and Flossie Joseph, are colleagues of mine at SMU, and I'm very happy to have worked with them in the past. Mark joined SMU quite a long time ago. He has spent already 16 years with SMU and is currently an associate professor of communication management. He is an excellent teacher. He got all kinds of awards for teaching, but also he's a very good consultant, and he worked with quite a lot of companies before he got his PhD, afterwards, and now currently as an associate professor at SMU. And Flossie, I know her also quite a while. She has been 8 years with SMU. She got an MBA originally in India from Madras University, but she is actually a graduate of SMU because she obtained her doctorate at SMU on issues of responsible leadership. So something that is actually quite close related to the topic that we have today. She's also the author of many case studies and currently is the program director in executive development, where she works with many companies from very different sectors, a diversity of sectors. The reason why I mentioned that is that actually both Mark and Flossie have a lot of experience in bridging what happens between the practice, what's happening in companies, and what's happening in sort of the more academic side, the more conceptual side, and they are able to bridge the two very well. And I think this book, of which I got yesterday a copy, so it feels still hot off the press. I should take it very carefully because it's hot off the press. But this book is really a book in which practice meets academia, where conceptual ideas are actually applied to practice. And in that sense, I think the book has a great future. I'm also very happy to be here because I've been, as one can expect, an author of a number of books, and I know how difficult it can be to write a book, how much work it takes, not only to write the book, to do all the interviews and write the book, but then actually the follow-up, working with the publisher and ensuring that you actually get a very good book. I have been able to go through it, to glance through it. I haven't read it all yet, therefore it was a bit too short, but it's a very readable book, and I will actually congratulate the authors, but also commend the book to many of you who are attending today, or who later on would see the recording of what we are doing today. But so much for the introduction of both authors. I'm sure that you actually want to hear more about the book. And perhaps I'm going to start off with a very simple question. In the beginning of the book, you write that you actually have used the concept of the 3 A's about articulate, assimilate, and activate. Sort of that concept to actually structure your interviews and structure actually the case studies that you have recorded in this book. Could you actually sort of spend a bit more time, maybe Mark, to start off with, to tell me, first of all, how you came together on working on this book, and then perhaps to flesh out a little bit more what that AAA, it sounds very good, huh? The AAA, it's very like a bond rating, right? I can trust this very much, but how the AAA framework that you used in your book, how this has helped you. So maybe Mark first, and Flosi also telling about the collaboration, and then Mark, perhaps you can tell us a bit more about the framework.
Thank you, Arnoud. Thank you very much for the very kind introduction, and good evening, everyone. This book actually started as an idea, I would say almost 3 years ago, with Jen Montesano, who is a friend of mine, and with whom I co-authored a book, I think almost 10 years ago. Jen works for a company in Japan called Lixil, and we were both reading an increasing number of media articles about the ascendance of purpose in the. And at that time, Jen was also shepherding an internal transformation at Lixil that was driven by an evolving purpose that is now articulated and assimilated within the organization. And I must attribute the 3 A's framework to her, because she was the one who came up with the initial idea of having this 3-part framework, although the ultimate naming of it as 3 A's was, I guess, a collaborative effort. But she was the one who came up with this concept, and I have to thank her for it. Then, unfortunately, Jen, due to work commitments, wasn't able to continue with the project. And when she left, the project was in limbo for a while, until, through a stroke of serendipity, I met Flossie on a work trip to Bhutan. I will maybe invite Flossie to fill in the rest of the story, because she had a big part to play in my trip to Bhutan.
Thank you, Mark, and good morning, good day, and good evening to all our viewers. I see many colleagues, former bosses, friends, families, business associates, and clients in the room. Thank you so much for being here with us in Singapore, a Friday evening, and it's about 10 minutes past 7. So to continue from where Mark has left off, it was in the fag end of 2019 that Mark and I were on a trip to Bhutan to do a particular program for the government of Bhutan, where we were sharing the bucket list of things that we had to do. And one of the things that I had was to write a book. And there came Mark's, this earlier project, which did not really go through. And we discovered, since I had a PhD on responsible leadership, that we saw some synergies there. Now, Mark and I, as you can see, are two different people. Mark is an academic and has very strong focus on communications, while I am more on a practitioner side. The complementary strengths that we had was that while Mark was very strong on content, I had the insights and the doors open to approach the C-suite leaders who were willing to spend some time for these interviews for the book. And thus started a journey in 2020, early 2020, in the height of COVID, for us to interview our 13 companies. And by the end, by middle of 2020, we had our interviews complete. And today, on this 15th of Jan, we have brought to you our final book, our final, the fruit of our labor, Living the Corporate Purpose, Insights from Companies in Asia.
I have to say also, Flossie, that actually COVID-19 helped us in a very big way, wouldn't you say so?
Absolutely. We managed to get access to all the C-suite leaders who couldn't travel. They were all stuck in their homes. And so it was so easy to reach out directly to them. Otherwise, we would be, they are so busy. They are always flying around. And we even wanted to interview one of the C-suite leaders in the airport, which didn't happen. It had happened from the living rooms of these leaders. So yes, COVID did play a role. And what we increasingly saw was how COVID was playing a part and a very important role for those organizations that were purpose-driven.
Absolutely.
Great. Flossie, it's very nice to see that book there in the background. I have to draw the attention to that. It's even better than the flowers that I see. Mark, coming back to you, you already indicated this AAA framework but I really would like to understand a little bit better what these three words really mean to you.
Okay. Yeah, so thank you. So the first A is articulate, the second A is assimilate, and the last one is activate. And as we dug deeper into the academic literature on each of these previously unrelated components, we found that there was actually quite a lot of theoretical underpinning to each of them. Articulate has to do with the task of identifying and putting words to what the corporate purpose is. And there's a couple of ways of looking at it. Some previous literature situates purpose at the heart of three concentric and overlapping circles. And one of the circles happens to be the organization's heritage. The second one happens to be the organization's core competencies and values. And the last of these overlapping circles is the stakeholders' expectations or needs. And ideally, a purpose would sit at the center of these. Two of those circles are internally oriented. The first one, having to do with heritage, has to do with the company's identity and history. The second one has to do with its core competencies and values. But it's when these internal and external orientations come together that you find something that could become the driving force or the North Star, as more and more people refer to purpose as the purpose of the company. Another way to look at the articulation of purpose is a perspective that was advanced by a couple of researchers last year in the Harvard Business Review. And they said, purpose could emanate from either a retrospective or an introspective approach. And by a retrospective approach, they mean looking back at the company's history, its identity formation, and its achievements, and codifying this journey into a very succinct statement that provides the organization with its North Star. The prospective approach takes the other end of the spectrum. It requires the organization and its leaders to look forward to trends that are shaping society and business, and deciding on the areas in which the company has the capability to make an impact. And in our book, we've looked at companies that have taken both approaches, and they tend to correspond with the stages of development that the company is at when it comes to their purpose journey. So that's the first A. The second A has to do with assimilate, and it has to do with the idea that a purpose statement is very helpful because it unifies everyone in the organization around the same cause. But if it stays as just a statement on the wall, it's not going to go very far. So this purpose has to be assimilated into the cultural fabric of the organization from top to bottom. And that statement has to answer, why the company exists and what unique value does it bring to the world. And assimilation can be done in a couple of ways. I think the central concept behind it is that of shared cognition. Idea that is shared cognitively by everyone in the organization. And going back again to academic research, a couple of ways that a company can go about fostering shared cognition include storytelling, the encouragement of desired behaviors through internal communication, training, recruitment, reward systems, and the setting of clear goals, but also through the creation of opportunities for collaboration. And the last one, the last A, has to do with activation. And this has to do with the idea that a company can only do so much on its own. If it wants to amplify its purpose and achieve meaningful social impact, not just in its country of origin, but throughout the region or the world, then the way to do it is through collaboration with external parties that could include other companies, NGOs, government institutions, and even individuals. And, the benefits from this collaboration are significant. They could confer moral authority on the firm. They could give the organization scale in terms of its impact, as well as learning opportunities. And these come to the partners' local knowledge, through their own networks, and through the kinds of physical and non-physical assets that they possess. And as soon as these activation efforts produce the desired results, these results then act as a form of validation to the company. And this form of validation acts as a sort of iterative feedback loop, which reinforces the purpose to begin with. So we see this 3A framework as not siloed entities, but as a self-reinforcing loop.
Mm-hmm. It sounds very interesting. But I was intrigued actually by your title, Living the Corporate Purpose. It's not only about what is corporate purpose, but it's actually living it. And sort of when I went through some of the case studies or some of the cases, I could see where you came from. But how did you actually choose these companies? Flosi, you actually mentioned that one sort of in the division of tasks, let me put it that way, between you and Mark, you actually were the one that had perhaps an easier contact to some of the C-suites. But how did were you just pragmatic and saying who can we get, or was there sort of a logic to how you choose the companies the 13 companies that are described in the book?
Well, it was much harder than that, Arnoud. It was, while we certainly had access to many of the C-suite leaders, we also did our research, Mark and I. We first went through the Purpose Power Index, which is a global index which talks about purpose-driven organizations, purpose-led organizations. Though this index largely focuses on US-based organizations, we used the context that they had very specifically in identifying leaders who can speak courageously and boldly because they are not afraid of controversies, because their actions are aligned with their purpose. Another aspect that we found was authentic leaders who communicated to their both internal and external stakeholders, and organizations that were operating in India in a very honorable and notable manner and very responsibly. which is where I was interested because it aligned with my leadership, the topic on responsible leadership. We really wanted to bring out a book which has a flavor of Asia because we felt that if our book had to be different, we didn't want to just put in content there, but we really wanted to add on live case studies, which our readers would be able to read. And those organizations would really like to inculcate purpose into their organization, would be able to have a playbook that they can refer to. We also wanted to look at organizations in different sectors. So our 13 organizations fall in different sectors. We also have organizations headquartered in Singapore, from India, from Vietnam, from Japan, and our cases are largely focusing on an Asian flavor.
Was that a conscious choice to go for Asian companies? Because actually, when I look at the list of companies, I see also quite international companies like Kellogg or UPS or DSM from the Netherlands. They don't sound to me like very Asian companies. Can you be a bit more specific about what you mean by Asian, the Asian flavor?
The Asian flavor is for these Europe and US based organizations. We focused on how the corporate purpose for most of these organizations are set up by the headquarters, and how this corporate purpose cascading to Asia. And that's what we have observed in these organizations. It was a little difficult for us to ignore these organizations because so much has happened with these organizations that our book would have been a very lopsided attempt if we just focused only on the Asian headquartered organizations. So we decided to have a good blend of European, US, and Asian headquartered organizations in our book.
That's interesting. I've done some work myself through case studies, and I sort of realize when you do case study based on research that sometimes you get this very memorable moments, this aha moments where you discover something that. Can you sort of give us a bit of anecdotes about interesting moments that you had during your interviewing? Mark, I'm going to start with you.
Okay, thank you. I'd say three companies come readily to mind. I'll just mention one first, and then I'll go to Frosty, and we can kind of go back and forth. A long time back, I actually owned some stocks in a pioneer in open source computing. I don't own the stocks anymore, but Red Hat happens to be one of the 13 companies featured in the book. And what I was really impressed by is that open source for Red Hat isn't just a technology, but also a way of life. I mean, its purpose statement is, and I'm going to read it out loud, that Red Hat exists to promote openness, to be a champion for collaboration, sharing, and transparency. The two things that really stood out to me was the fact that the purpose statement, true to Red Hat's open focus, was generated from the efforts of 11,000 Red Hatters. That's what they call their employees. 11,000 Red Hatters who collectively contributed 2,400 story ideas. And from these 2,400 submissions, the company's leadership, with the help of the staff, were able to then distill it down to something which was succinct and meaningful for the employees. The other thing that that resonated with me as we did the interviews with the Red Hat is the very important role that they played in Singapore's response to the COVID-19 crisis. So I don't know how well known this is, but many of us, including my mom, carries around this token, and we all have this Trace Together app on our phones that allows the government to do contact tracing in the event somebody gets infected with the virus. Well, Red Hat had a very big part to play in it because they were instrumental in opening the code for the Trace Together app. So this app is a world first. It is the first contact tracing app developed in the world. At the time that the book was written, it had already more than 1 million downloads in Singapore. And this was all done within 8 weeks, which is really amazing. I think, there's nothing like kudos from external stakeholders, right? So since its launch, the Trace Together app has received multiple requests from governments from around the world who wanted to replicate the same technology. So I'll pass on to Flossie, and then I'll share the other two companies.
Yeah, Flossie?
Thanks, Arnoud. So let me start with maybe a story from Becton Dickinson. I see my colleague from Becton Dickinson here in the room. Becton Dickinson, or BD, is a medical technology company, and they have their purpose, which is advancing the world of health. So it was in March that we had our interview with the President for Greater Asia of BD, Mr. James Lim. And this was a time when, the COVID had really peaked in Wuhan, whereas the rest of the regions in Asia was not so impacted. So, we were hearing stories of stories from Wuhan coming out during that time. So he shared a very interesting anecdote about an employee from Shanghai who actually had to drive down to Wuhan to deliver some equipments to the hospitals in Wuhan. Now, this gentleman was actually putting his life at stake because, he had to go and deliver there. He was not told to do it. He volunteered to do it. It took him, it was 1,000 kilometers from Shanghai to Wuhan. He went in there. He had support of his colleagues. Wuhan was completely locked down. And yet he managed to deliver the equipments which helped the people of Wuhan, stayed in Wuhan for 14 days to do his quarantine, and then came back. We were quite inspired by the story because the purpose of advancing the world of health was set by the corporate headquarters at Franklin Lakes. And it was James Lim, the President for Asia, who was instrumental in getting his senior colleagues from the US to come down to Asia, hold leadership dialogues to cascade the purpose right down to every employee in BD. And James shares with us that this brings about an element of servant leadership, a need to serve, and it makes ordinary employees do extraordinary things. And there's a beautiful, greater stories from BD that you can read from our book. I will also maybe share one more before I move on to Mark. Let me share about Olam, because I know there's a colleague from Olam here in the room. Olam is, for those of you who are maybe not based in Singapore, is known as a corporate farmer, and they have their purpose statement as reimagining global agriculture and food systems. Now, Olam has a very dynamic CEO in Sunny Verghese, and he was always driven by purpose and to lead with a purpose. Olam already had a purpose statement, which was growing responsibly, but they felt that they were operating in more than 90 countries, and 5 million of their stakeholders were farmers that they were reaching out to. Now, we all know that the farmers, this community as such, they are at a below subsistence level. And very often, it is not very often, research has shown that 1/3 of the food that is produced is either lost or wasted. So Olam actually brought together 500 people from across their global offices, called them as reimaginers, and they went into this task of deciding what has to be the new purpose and how is it that they can integrate this value chain across Olam. And from these 500 reimaginers, so many ideas surfaced that the top 10 ideas were brought together. A seed funding was given to the top 10 ideas. And today, there are numerous examples that we have quoted in the book. One example that I do want to share is this app that they have brought out called At Source, which is digitally connecting the various stakeholders in a very comprehensive and sustainable solution, so that the farmers in the community who's at the source actually get the best rates for the produce that they have. It has been a very a comprehensive effort from across the organization, and we have with us Nikki and who supported us with the stories from Olam. So we are grateful to Shekhar and to the entire Olam team, because we really saw that, how is it that an agricultural company and so diverse really trying to make a difference and follow the UN Sustainability Development Goals. And Olam has achieved considerable success and merit with their repurposed purpose of reimagining global agriculture and food systems. Mark, maybe I will take a pause and hand over to you. Mark,
give us a few more examples.
Okay, I'll give two more, and then I'll go back to you, Flossie. I think earlier in the chat, Arnoud, you asked why it is that we also selected Western companies, right? And I think Flossie gave a very good answer in that some of these companies also are executing purpose-driven initiatives in Asia, which is one of the reasons why we also chose to feature them. And one company that stood out for me is Kellogg's. And, this is a brand that many of us grew up with, I think, in Singapore, but maybe in other parts of Asia as well. They are almost synonymous with cornflakes. This is a company founded by a gentleman who truly believed in the importance of nutrition and well-being. So it's not surprising that their purpose is articulated as nourishing families so they can flourish and thrive. What's interesting to me is that in Asia, they have taken that founding purpose statement and tailored it so that it meets a very specific social need in this part of the world. Through their research, they found that hidden hunger, and more specifically micronutrient deficiencies, was something that was afflicting a lot of children in Asia. So they repurposed their founding purpose and decided that what the Asia operations would do is to address hidden hunger in Asia, because it is not just good for society, but also in the long term good for their business. And the thing that really stood out to us as we did the research and the interviews is how comprehensive their efforts have been in this region. They are involved in feeding undernourished people in Malaysia and Korea through special programs. They're improving livelihoods in countries like India while reducing environmental impact. And they're also advancing sustainable agriculture in countries like Bangladesh.
Mark, you actually mentioned something very interesting, and I want to pick up on it because also Flossie referred to it. You talked about repurposing the purpose. Do you think that the dynamism or the dynamics of purpose are important, the fact that they change over time? Or, yeah. I mean, I sort of came in with this idea that a purpose is something that is relatively stable over time. And both of you now talked about repurposing.
Thanks, Arnoud. I actually, the best way for me to respond to that is perhaps by sharing very quickly the journey of DBS, which is also a company we featured in our book. The actual name of DBS Bank is the Development Bank of Singapore, and it was set up in the late 60s at a time when post-independence Singapore was not in a very good place economically. So it was given the mission or the purpose by the government to help Singapore to internationalize and to fund the development of export-oriented industries and enterprises in the country through financing, because they're, after all, a bank. And they've done a very good job. I mean, they've done some groundbreaking work and investments. They were behind the very first shopping mall in Singapore. They were behind the very first convention center in Singapore. But times have changed. And when Piyush Gupta, the DBS CEO, took over about, I think, 10 to 12 years ago, he saw that the advent of digital technologies was transforming the way that consumers were behaving and the way that they were going about banking. And he realized that if DBS did not transform, it would soon be out of business. In our interview, I think it was Piyush who quoted something from Bill Gates, who said that people need banking, but they don't need banks. So he realized then that DBS had already done a really good job over the last 3 to 4 decades in helping Singapore to industrialize and to develop export-oriented capabilities. And he realized that in order for the bank to survive and do well, that they had to make banking joyful, because banking through their studies is something that most consumers dread doing. So yeah, I agree too. So they repurposed their purpose from one of helping Singapore to thrive in the global stage to one of reinventing banking itself by making banking joyful.
Yeah. Any other example that you want to highlight from your interviews, or was there another memorable event that happened?
Maybe
Rosie?
I will, yes, Arnoud, we have just maybe, I'm looking at the time as well, so perhaps 2 more stories.
Be at ease, I'm watching the time.
Thank you. So we were getting ready to interview the resident director of Tata Sons here in Singapore. And the same morning, so the interview was set up for the afternoon. And the same morning, and as you know, I'm an Indian, I do tend to watch the news, what was happening in India. And I happened to see this article from the Times of India, which is one of India's leading papers, which had the picture of a doctor and a nurse, 2 medical professionals working on COVID duty, taking a selfie from the hotel room of the Taj in Mumbai. Now, for those of you who are from India and for the rest of us, the Taj Hotel is a 5-star hotel, and an ordinary or an average Indian cannot really afford even a meal, forget accommodation in the room. The Tatas have always known to give back to the society, and they have a purpose improving communities through long-term stakeholder value creation. So when we shared the story with KV Rao, what KV told us was that the sense of giving back is so ingrained into the DNA of every employee that the Taj Hotel staff did not really have to take permission from their senior leaders to even open the doors of their hotel to COVID staff, to COVID professionals working on duty. And for those of you who are familiar with India, in a city like Mumbai, it's very different for people who are working in, the conditions, the medical conditions are maybe not that favorable. And I thought that was a very powerful and a touching story, where there's so many stories of how Tatas give back, but this really articulated, assimilated, and activated the purpose of Tatas. I also want to end with maybe one more case on Prudential. And Prudential, for the rest of you, is an insurance company here in Singapore. Been here in Singapore for the last about 85 years or so. And during in 2016 or so, it was the then president, the CEO of Prudential, who decided that they really needed to change the culture at Prudential if they really wanted to be future forward-looking, and thus embarked an exercise from the Prudential employees. And why I specify Prudential is that from our various interviews that we had, Prudential stands out because the purpose at Prudential was articulated bottom up. It was the employees who came together through various sessions to come up with this purpose statement, which actually reads as help everyone to live well. And this helping everyone is now the culture at Prudential. They don't really have individual officers for the senior leaders. The CEO himself does not have a room. And as the CHRO and the Ping, who's the corporate communications manager, shared the entire story of working around the corporate purpose. There was also a change in the leadership team at leadership, the CEO at Prudential. The incoming CEO was so impressed with whatever he was reading about Prudential. You know, they were the first ones to say that there's no retirement age, and they kind of scrapped the retirement age to live up to 100. During COVID, they came up with the Prue Care package, which, because financial agents always had a face-to-face approach in dealing with their customers, but with COVID, that was not possible. So, how did they really bring digitally, use digital sources to come closer to their customers? And it's a wonderful story that we wanted to highlight from Prudential as well. We could go on, but I think.
Yes, but I'm going to stop you here, Flosi. Mark, I have another question. I went through the book. I sort of glanced through a number of the chapters, but of course, as an academic, I also jumped immediately to the last chapter to figure out what you would conclude. And actually, you answered the question in that last chapter that had been living with me. That is this a binary thing that you are either living the purpose or you don't? And what I sort of got out of that last chapter is, of course, not. It's an evolution. You grow into being a purpose-driven company, and you come up with this interesting triple E, not triple A, but triple E framework. Could you just quickly explain a bit that triple E framework?
Thanks, Arnoud, for prefacing, what we wrote. You're absolutely right. Based on our research and interviews with these 13 companies, we found that they exist on a spectrum of purpose. So on the one hand, you have established companies with established purpose statements that have been handed down mostly from the legendary, iconic founders. Companies like Tata, BD, Kellogg, Cobra, UPS. These are companies that belong to the established category. But we're also very mindful that there are companies that are just starting the journey for a number of reasons. So on the other end of the spectrum, you've got the emerging purpose-driven companies like Lixo, like Siemens, like Prudential. And what's interesting in the emerging category is that several of these organizations are actually using or were using purpose as a way to unify the merger of separate entities within the global organization. That because they were bringing together what previously existed as separate silos or sub-organizations, they needed something that could act as a unifying glue, and purpose came in very handy. And then in the middle, you've got a group called the evolutionary purpose-driven companies. These are companies like DBS, like Olam and Mahindra. And I mentioned in brief DBS's purpose-driven journey. These are companies that already had a purpose or a purpose statement to begin with, but because of a number of circumstances, they had to repurpose that purpose statement. In the case of DBS, it was in response to the challenge and opportunity presented by digital transformation, for instance. And what we found from our observation and analysis is that each of these three categories of companies, emerging, evolutionary, and established, also adopted different approaches to purpose formation. The emerging companies tended to be prospective in nature. In other words, they tended to look to the future, or at least the evolving future, to look at opportunities where the company could make an impact. Whereas established companies, on the other hand, tended to hold true to the founding purposes of the founders, and by default, used an introspective approach, or retrospective approach, I'm sorry, looking back at what happened in the past, looking at the founding values and vision and ethos of the founders for guidance. And in the middle, you've got the evolutionary companies that use a hybrid of both approaches.
Thank you. That is quite I actually believe very much it is developing a purpose-driven company, living a purpose-driven company is something that you don't go from one day to the other, but there is actually a lot of work to be done. You grow into it, right? And it's actually an evolution that is an important one. As I mentioned, I am also the chairman of the Stewardship Asia Center, where we strongly believe that companies are not only about shareholder value. Actually, shareholder value is actually a very limited economic concept to handle the agency between the board and the CEO of an organization. It's actually, and somehow economists have made that in the purpose of the firm, but that can't be. I mean, firms have a strong purpose and will only survive and will be accepted by society only when they live a particular purpose, when they do something that is accepted by society as being, as contributing to the evolution of society, and using resources in such a way that they can also be used by next generation. So I very much believe in this, the whole idea of the purpose-driven organization and going through that path. I was actually also intrigued that you had 3 people that have strongly endorsed you. Of course, the Dean of the Business School, Jerry George, but also Pradeep Pant, who of course is the ex-president of Mondelez International for Asia Pacific. And then I saw also the very interesting preface by my very good friend Ho Kwon Ping, the chairman of SMU, but also the CEO of an, or the executive chairman, I should say, of a very purpose-driven company, Banyan Tree Hotels and Resorts. So any comments on how you convinced them to endorse you?
Flossie?
Yeah, so in fact, Ho Kwon Ping, and for the rest of our viewers, he is the chairman, as Arnoud rightly mentioned. We saw an article that Ho Kwon Ping had penned in the Business Times, which was about leading with purpose. And we had completed our 13 interviews. The book had been sent, the first proof had already happened. And we were a little hesitant to approach the chairman because we were worried about the question that why is it that Banyan Tree would not have been chosen for our story in the book. Now, one of the things is that we really wanted the CEOs to speak to us. And we knew it was very difficult to get the time of the chairman to speak to us. And he would not have, after all, Mark is a professor and I'm with the Office of Executive Development, we were not confident. I had the opportunity to meet the chairman when he joined us in one of our programs. And when I casually checked with him, he was very forthcoming. And because the book was on purpose, he said he would be very happy to write a foreword for us. And his foreword was the shortest because in about 48 hours, we had checked with him. He had some ideas. We wrote our ideas in 48 hours. It was done and over. So we are very, very fortunate that our book has Ho Kwon Ping. It has, of course, Dean Jerry George, who's unfortunately not here with us because it conflicts with another class he has, and Pradeep, who joined us to understand more, gave us a little more inputs on how we could further enhance our book, which we did after having our meeting with them. So we're very grateful to the 2 of them. We also are grateful to a whole host of others, but before that, maybe I'll just jump to you, Mark, for your final, for some thoughts from you before I come back to the rest of them.
Right. So I want to kind of pick up from something you said regarding Pradeep's advice to us. When we met Pradeep, one of the recommendations he gave us was to find, if possible, quantitative evidence of the impact that purpose has had on the financial performance of the firms that we featured. And it was very difficult to do that for a number of reasons, including the fact that since we were focusing only on the Asian operations of such firms, it wasn't always easy to parse out the financial data from their annual reports. But I think we also have to keep in mind that purpose is a long-term commitment, which is something that may not show up in quarterly earnings reports. Having said that, however, I think if we had had more time to work on this book, we had to respect the publication deadline. If we had had more time to work on this book, and this is perhaps an idea for a future research article, we could look at the return on investment in purpose by way of employee loyalty and also reputation as it is portrayed in the media. The other thing that came to my mind is that, ultimately, purpose is about leadership. I know this sounds very cliched and it has been said time and again, but I think the 13 companies in the book show that when the times get hard, what's the saying? When
the going gets tough, the tough gets
yes,
going.
when the going gets tough. Thank you, Flossie. When the going gets tough, the tough get going, right? So it would have been easy for these companies to shirk their purpose-related responsibilities during this very trying time because they were stretched financially, they were stretched in many other ways. And from the few stories we've been able to share in the last 45 minutes, I think you could tell that not only did they not shirk their responsibilities and their commitments, they actually over-delivered in many ways.
Thank you. Before I let you off, and before we explain how participants can ask questions about the book, I just have a personal question to the two of you. How is it to work together for 10 months and get this book out? By the way, I'm very impressed that you got it out in 10 months. I mean, my book about ecosystems for innovation, it took Peter and me 6 years to get it out. How did you do it to make it so fast, and how was it to work together? Give us an insight, a personal insight.
Flossie, you.
I would say, as I said earlier, Mark and I are very different people. And I guess when I first wrote my first case study and ran it by Mark, the reality hit me that my style of writing is very different from Mark's style of writing. But I guess it was also COVID, and we also, because we are working in the same institution, we could actually talk to each other and crib about the same issues that we were having, take comfort from each other. And maybe one of the one thing that worked for Mark and for me, Arnoud, which may not have worked for you and Peter, is that Mark and I were both in Singapore. Whereas you and your co-author, where he's Professor Williamson is in London and you are here, so that makes it a little more difficult. And moreover, I think at your level, Arnoud, you are facing 1,000 more things than what we are both doing. So I guess we feel that your book on ecosystem edge cannot be compared to our book by no stretch of imagination.
Oh, don't say that. Congratulations on the book. And I hand over to you, Flossie, for closing this session, and then probably the MC will take over from you. But once again, congratulations, and I really encourage everybody to read it.
Thank you so much, Arnoud, and to all our viewers. It's been a pleasure to have you. I know some of you, I have reached out very late this morning, and it's nice to see some of you here in the room with us today. We are indeed grateful, Mark and I, to our 13 organizations, the C-suite leaders that we interviewed, the support that we got from the comms department, because we do see many of them here in the room with us. So the 13 CEOs without whom this book would not have been possible. We are grateful to our 2 transcribers, Sheeman, who supported Mark, and Neville, who supported me in transcribing all our interviews for the purpose of this book. We see many of our clients, associates, friends, colleagues, bosses, and more importantly, family, who's here to support us on this special day for Mark and for myself. We thank World Scientific Publishing, Sandhya, you especially, because I think the conversation started with you and you have been a part of this journey, and colleagues from Huiyin and the others from World Scientific Publishing. Very, very importantly, Professor De Meyer, a big thank you to you. And I often say this in programs where you come to support me, that I was very sad when you actually stepped down as the president of SMU. But what it really did is that you had some time in your hands, and it's not easy. I would never have approached you if you were the president of the university to join us on a Friday evening at 7 p.m. to do this for us. So we're very grateful that for us, for Mark and for me, having you do this session for us, moderate this as a special guest, means a lot to us. And finally, Mark, to you, how could we have gone so far without each other? And I hope that the association, my role in SMU makes, I deal with a lot of faculty, very many faculty, both from SMU and from outside SMU. And it's quite telling that I had to reach out to Mark for this assignment that we had to do in Bhutan. And I first met Mark in the airport, having seen his picture in the SMU website. Our first meeting actually happened in the airport when we were boarding the flight to Bhutan. And that was a relationship that started then. And I really hope we can continue our association in the years to come.
Absolutely. Thank you, Flossie. Thank you. It's been one heck of a ride in the last 10 to 12 months, but I do not regret a single moment of it. I think that this could be the start of other interesting projects. Let's see what the response is from the readers, from the media, and if there is a deep interest in this topic. I think this could be the start of a series of other projects in terms of outreach, training, but also research. So I really look forward to working further with you. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank Arnoud for his support during this journey. Thank you.
Over to you, Sandhya.
Yes. Thank you, Flossie. And thank you, everyone, for attending. Thank you, Professor De Meyer, Professor Mark Chong, and Dr. Flossie Joseph, for taking time to share your thoughts and insights. And thank you, participants, for your time. And I'm happy to let you know that you can avail 20% discount on the selling price of the book from now until 31st January 2021. And the discount code can be found in the chat box. Thank you once again, and good day and good night. Yeah. Thank you.